She chased her puppy into the Mafia boss's car. Her dog refused to leave his side. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The rain came down in sheets, the kind that made the world blur into a wash of gray, with every street lamp casting pools of light onto the pavement. Isabella Santos had never felt more out of place in her life. She was running late, juggling too many things in one night. The charity gala she had been forced to work at was now coming to a close, and she was exhausted from serving drinks to Manhattan's elite for what seemed like hours. She had one last task before she could finally escape the world of diamond-studded women and champagne-soaked men, the puppy. The little fur ball had darted off again, its playful antics leading her right toward the black SUV parked by the curb. She barely had time to make out the shape of the luxury vehicle when her dog, in a state of sheer joy, jumped straight into the car. Isabella's heart skipped a beat as she hurried after it. The soft pitter-patter of rain on the pavement only heightened the sense of urgency in Isabella's movements. She reached for the car door, not realizing the gravity of what she was about to do. The moment she opened it, she was hit with the unmistakable scent of expensive cologne. "You've got to be kidding me," she muttered under her breath, realizing that the black SUV wasn't just some car. It was his car. Aleandro Romano, the infamous Mafia boss, stood before her like a shadow. Imposing, elegant, dangerous. His sharp jawline, dark hair, and icy blue eyes were unmistakable, and in that moment, everything around Isabella seemed to freeze. "You're going to regret this," he said, his voice calm, yet dripping with authority. Isabella's mind raced. The puppy, still inside the car, wagged its tail happily, oblivious to the situation it had just caused. Isabella glanced at Aleandro, knowing she had made a huge mistake. She turned, desperate to leave, but his presence, commanding and unwavering, rooted her to the spot. The seconds felt like hours. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves, but it was no use. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to intrude. I'll just take the dog and leave," she said, her voice a mix of defiance and fear. But Aleandro's smirk told her it was already too late. "No, you are mine now," he said, his words slow and deliberate, sending a chill down her spine. Isabella wanted to argue, to scream, but nothing came out. She couldn't move, couldn't even think straight. The weight of his gaze seemed to pierce her, and before she knew it, two men in dark suits appeared by her side, their grip on her arms firm but not cruel. The puppy, now nestled comfortably at Aleandro's side, barked happily, as though it had no idea the storm of chaos it had just unleashed. Isabella looked around. There was no escape. The people at the gala, the ones who had been laughing and celebrating just moments ago, were now silent, their gazes lingering on her, but no one dared to intervene. She wasn't sure if they were frightened of Aleandro or just indifferent to her plight, but it didn't matter. She was alone. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling as she tried to find her strength. "I don't want to be a part of this. I was just trying to take my dog." Aleandro's eyes narrowed as he observed her, studying her with an intensity that felt like it could strip away every secret she held. "You heard something you shouldn't have, Isabella," he said, his tone growing colder. "Now, you're a part of my world whether you want to be or not." Tears welled up in her eyes as the reality of her situation sank in. She had no idea how to handle this, no idea what this meant for her life. She had just been a simple waitress, barely scraping by, trying to make ends meet for nursing school. But now, the world she had always known was crumbling around her, replaced by something dark and terrifying. "Where are you taking me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You'll understand soon enough," Aleandro replied, his words sending a shiver down her spine. Isabella had no choice but to follow him. As they moved toward the black SUV, she caught one last glimpse of the glittering gala, her old life. The life she had worked so hard to hold on to. The life she had lost the moment she'd chased after her puppy into the Mafia boss's car. The door of the SUV slammed shut behind her with an almost finality to it. As the car began to move, she stared out the window, watching the city lights blur in the rain. It was then that she realized this wasn't just an accident. This was destiny. Whether she liked it or not, she was now bound to Aleandro Romano, and there was no turning back. "Welcome to my world, Isabella," he said, his voice soft but absolute. And as the car sped off into the night, she knew that everything had changed. She was no longer a waitress from Queens. She was something else now, something that belonged to him. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Isabella sat in the back of the black SUV, her hands shaking, staring out at the world as it passed by. The streets of Manhattan blurred in the rain, each drop tapping rhythmically against the windows. The silence in the car was deafening, broken only by the low hum of the engine. Aleandro sat across from her, his gaze fixed on the road ahead, his face unreadable. The two men who had escorted her into the car remained silently flanking her, their eyes always scanning, always watching. The weight of the situation settled in her chest like a stone. She had no idea where they were going or what would happen next, but she knew one thing for sure. There was no turning back. Her world had just shifted, and she was caught in a whirlwind of danger and power. As the car made its way through the city, Isabella's mind raced. She couldn't stop thinking about her life before this moment. Her small apartment, her dream of becoming a nurse, her puppy, her only source of comfort. Everything she had worked so hard for felt so far away now. The only thing that seemed real in this moment was Aleandro. The way he had looked at her with those cold, calculating eyes. The way he had claimed her, marking her as his. The memory of his voice, low and steady, echoed in her ears. "You are mine now." She tried to steady her breath, but the anxiety clawed at her insides. What did he want with her? Why was he so certain that she belonged to him? The thoughts spun in her head, and she couldn't make sense of any of it. She had barely known this man. He was a mafia boss, a world she knew nothing about, and yet somehow, she was tied to him now. She had heard stories about men like him, ruthless, powerful, untouchable. But being in his presence, feeling the weight of his influence, was something else entirely. The car turned down a long, private road, and soon, the mansion appeared before her, massive, towering, and dark. It looked like something straight out of a movie, a fortress that seemed to swallow the world around it. The gates loomed high, and as the car approached, two guards stepped forward, opening the gates with practiced ease. Isabella's heart thudded in her chest. This was no ordinary home. This was a world of wealth, power, and danger, a world she had never imagined she would be a part of. The SUV rolled up the long driveway, the sound of the tires crunching on the gravel, the only noise in the otherwise still night. The mansion was surrounded by high walls, tall trees, and perfectly manicured grounds. As they neared the front entrance, Isabella could see the faint outline of armed guards moving about, their presence a stark reminder that she was far from the life she had known. The car came to a stop, and Aleandro didn't wait for anyone to open the door for him. He got out with an effortless grace, his tailored suit gleaming under the faint light. He didn't look back as he walked toward the front door, his two men following behind him like shadows. Isabella hesitated for a moment before she was gently nudged out of the car by one of the men. "Come on," he said, his voice cold but not unkind. "You're not staying in the car all night." Isabella stepped out, her legs feeling weak beneath her. She was in a daze, everything happening so fast that she could barely keep up. The mansion loomed over her, the ornate stone pillars and glowing chandeliers visible through the large windows. It felt like she had stepped into another world, one that was beautiful but terrifying at the same time. As they entered the grand foyer, Isabella's breath caught in her throat. The ceilings were impossibly high, the marble floors gleaming with opulence. Expensive artwork hung on the walls, and the air smelled faintly of expensive cologne and polished wood. It was a world of luxury and wealth, a world she had never belonged to and never thought she would. Aleandro stood in front of her, watching her with a gaze that seemed to pierce right through her. "This is your new home," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "You'll stay here from now on. Get used to it." Isabella opened her mouth to protest, but the words caught in her throat. What was there to say? She had no choice but to follow his orders, and she knew it. The man who had been leading her turned toward Aleandro. Everything's prepared, sir. The guest room is ready. Aleandro nodded, his eyes still on Isabella. Good, he said. Show her to her room. Without a word, one of the men took her arm, guiding her up the grand staircase. As they walked down the hallway, Isabella couldn't help but glance over her shoulder at the door. For a moment, she almost thought about running, about making a dash for freedom. But she knew that wasn't an option. The guards, the walls, the eyes that were always watching, there was no escaping. She was trapped. They reached a door at the end of the hallway, and the man opened it for her. Inside was a lavishly decorated room, with a king-sized bed covered in silky sheets, expensive furniture, and soft lighting. It looked like a sweet fit for a queen, but it felt more like a prison than a sanctuary. You'll stay here for now, the man said. Get some rest. You'll need it. As the door clicked shut behind her, Isabella stood in the middle of the room, her heart racing in her chest. She had no idea what was going to happen next. But she knew one thing for certain. Her life had just taken a turn she could never have predicted. And now, she was in the hands of a man who owned everything, including her. She sank onto the bed, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. She had been brought here against her will, but something else was starting to stir inside her. Something dangerous, something that told her that this was only the beginning, and that no matter how hard she tried to fight it, she was now a part of this world, whether she liked it or not. In the distance, she could hear the faint sounds of laughter and music, as if the world outside continued without a care. But inside, in the silence of her new reality, Isabella could feel the storm brewing. She was trapped in a world of power, and there was no telling where it would take her. Welcome to my world, Isabella. Aleandro's voice echoed in her mind, and for the first time, she wasn't sure if she could escape it. She was in too deep now. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Isabella sat on the edge of the massive bed, her hands trembling as she looked around the room. The walls were lined with luxurious fabrics, and the furniture was the kind she had only seen in magazines, rich, dark wood, and soft, plush materials. She had never seen anything like this in her life. It was beautiful, it was expensive, and yet it felt suffocating. This room, this mansion, this entire world, it was all alien to her. It felt like she had been swallowed by a life she didn't understand, a world where money, power, and control ruled everything. She stood up, pacing the room as she tried to calm herself. She couldn't let herself fall apart, not now. She had to figure out what her next move would be. She couldn't stay in this gilded cage forever, but she knew she couldn't leave. Either, not with the guards outside, not with Aleandro watching her every move. He had made it clear, she belonged to him now. The thought made her stomach twist. How had she gone from a simple waitress, struggling to make ends meet, to being caught up in a world like this? What did Aleandro want with her? Was he just playing some power game, or was there something more? She had no answers, only questions. And the more she thought about it, the more she realized that she didn't want to know the answers. She wanted to escape. But how? The sound of footsteps approaching the door interrupted her thoughts, and her heart skipped a beat. She didn't need to look through the peephole to know who it was. Aleandro. She could feel his presence even when he wasn't in the room, like a weight pressing down on her chest. His power, his control, it was overwhelming. The door opened, and there he was, tall, dark, and commanding. His presence seemed to fill the room, making everything else fade into the background. He closed the door behind him, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. How are you settling in? He asked, his voice low and smooth, like honey poured over steel. Isabella didn't trust herself to speak. She didn't want to say anything that would give him more power over her, so she stayed silent. But Aleandro didn't seem to mind. He stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. You don't have to be afraid, he said, his voice softer now, almost reassuring. I'm not going to hurt you. The words didn't have the comfort he seemed to intend. How could he say that when everything about him screamed danger? He was a mafia boss, powerful, ruthless, untouchable, and she was nothing more than a pawn in his world. I just want to understand what you want from me, Isabella said finally, her voice shaking but steady. Why am I here? Aleandro didn't answer right away. Instead, he circled around her, his gaze sweeping over the room as if appraising the situation. When he finally spoke, it was with an air of finality, as if he had already made his decision. You're here because I need you, he said. You heard something tonight that you shouldn't have, and now you're a part of my world. I can't have you running around with that knowledge. But I also don't want to hurt you. He stopped in front of her, his eyes locking onto hers again. I want you to stay here. Not just because of what you know, but because you belong here. You belong to me. And that's something you'll learn to accept. Isabella swallowed hard. The words hit her like a slap, and for a moment, she felt as if the room was spinning. How could he say that? How could he think that she belonged to him? She shook her head, trying to clear the fog that had settled over her mind. I don't belong here, she said, her voice rising despite herself. I don't belong to you. Aleandro's eyes flashed, and for a moment, the calm mask slipped. His gaze became harder, colder. You belong to me, he repeated, his voice low and menacing. Whether you accept it or not. The air between them grew thick with tension. Isabella wanted to scream, to run, to do anything to escape this nightmare. But she couldn't move. She was trapped, both by the walls of this mansion and by the man standing in front of her. Aleandro stepped back, his demeanor shifting again, as if the anger had never been there. I'll give you time to adjust, he said, his voice cool and controlled once more. But remember, you're not leaving this place. Not until I say you can. Isabella wanted to argue, to fight back, but the words stuck in her throat. What could she say? How could she fight him when he controlled everything around her? The mansion, the guards, the power, it was all in his hands. Aleandro turned and walked toward the door. You'll be fine, he said, without turning back. Get some rest. Tomorrow, we'll discuss your role here. The door clicked shut behind him, and Isabella was left standing in the middle of the room, her heart racing, her thoughts spinning. She had no idea what tomorrow would bring, but she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't stay here. Not like this. She had to find a way out. But as she looked around at the opulent room, the luxurious bed, the lavish furniture, she realized that escaping would be harder than she thought. Aleandro wasn't just offering her a life of luxury. He was offering her a life of control, of submission, and she didn't know if she had the strength to break free. For now, all she could do was wait, and hope that somehow, some way, she would find a way to escape the world that had just claimed her. Because she wasn't going to let him win. Not without a fight. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The days had become a blur for Isabella. She had been living in the mansion for what felt like weeks, but it was only a few days. Every moment was a new layer of reality she had to peel back, each one more suffocating than the last. Her room was luxurious, but it was a gilded cage. Her world had shifted from quiet apartment life to an intimidating, never-ending stream of opulence and surveillance. Every corner she turned, someone was watching. Every movement she made, someone was ready to report it to Aleandro. She had no privacy, no freedom. Isabella stood by the window, her eyes scanning the rain-soaked streets below. It felt like everything outside was moving, but inside, she was frozen. The world outside was so different from the one she had known, but it also felt so far away. The sound of footsteps approaching her door snapped her out of her trance. She turned just as the door opened and two of Aleandro's men stepped inside. They didn't need to say anything. One of them was holding a tray with a breakfast she had no appetite for, while the other stood by the door, his eyes scanning the room as if to make sure nothing had been tampered with. She hated this feeling, the constant surveillance, but she said nothing. There was no point in protesting anymore. It wouldn't change anything. Mr. Romano has requested your presence, one of them said in his clipped tone. Isabella sighed, her heart heavy. She had no choice. She knew it was coming, and there was no escaping it. Slowly, she walked toward the door, past the men who were watching her every move. They led her through the maze of hallways, each one more extravagant than the last. She had stopped being impressed by the luxury a long time ago. All she could think of was how much she hated being here, how much she hated being his. Finally, they stopped in front of a set of double doors. One of the men knocked, and then pushed them open, revealing Aleandro standing by a large window. He was looking out over the grounds, his hands clasped behind his back, his posture commanding. There was something about him that made the air feel thick, almost suffocating. His presence was impossible to ignore, and every time Isabella thought she might break free, she found herself rooted to the spot, unable to escape. "You're here," he said without turning around. Isabella didn't respond. What was there to say? She was here because she had no choice. She was trapped in his world now, whether she liked it or not. Aleandro turned slowly, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her heart race. "I know you don't want to be here," he said, his voice low but filled with power. "But you'll learn to accept it. You're mine now, Isabella. And that means you'll stay by my side. Always." The words hit her like a physical blow. Every instinct in her body screamed for her to fight back, to run, to do anything to escape this nightmare. But she couldn't. She was too far in. "I'll never accept this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll never accept you." Aleandro didn't flinch. His gaze softened for just a second, and then it was gone. He took a step forward, closing the distance between them. "You don't have to accept me," he said. "But you will learn that it's easier to obey. Resistance only brings pain, Isabella. And I don't want to hurt you. But I will if I must." The words sent a shiver down her spine. She could see the truth behind them. He wasn't bluffing. He was capable of hurting her, emotionally, physically, or both. "I'm not going to hurt you," he repeated, as if reading her mind. "I'll give you time. Time to adjust. But you will learn to trust me." Isabella stared at him, fighting the urge to scream. Trust him? How could she trust a man who had taken everything from her, who had stripped away every ounce of her independence and forced her into a life she didn't choose? "I'll never trust you," she said, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and fear. Aleandro's expression hardened, but there was no trace of anger in his eyes. Instead, there was something colder, something more calculating. He didn't need her trust. He didn't care about her emotions. What he wanted was her compliance. And she could already feel herself slipping further into his world. "Then I'll make you trust me," he said, his tone final. "One way or another, Isabella. You'll come to understand that." The two men who had brought her here stepped forward again, their presence like shadows, waiting for her to move. She didn't have a choice. She had to follow them, had to follow him. As she turned to leave the room, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Aleandro had taken control of her life, and there was no telling what would come next. But one thing was certain, she would never be the same again. She was in too deep now, and no matter how much she fought, she knew that she couldn't escape this life, this world that Aleandro had built around her. And for the first time, Isabella realized just how powerless she really was. "Come with me," the guard said, his voice breaking her from her thoughts. With one final glance at Aleandro, she followed him out of the room, knowing that her life had changed forever. She was no longer just a waitress. She was now a part of his world, a world she couldn't escape, no matter how much she wanted to. And that realization sent a cold shiver down her spine as she stepped further into the dark unknown. This was her life now. There was no turning back. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The days seemed to blur together for Isabella, each one indistinguishable from the last. She had been living under Aleandro's roof for nearly a week now, and with each passing day, the walls around her seemed to close in tighter. The mansion was grand, every inch designed to remind her of the power it held, but it felt like a prison. The luxurious decor, the soft velvet curtains, the marble floors, nothing mattered. She wasn't free. She sat in her room, staring at the wall. She hadn't spoken to anyone except the occasional guard that passed through. Aleandro kept his distance, but she knew he was always watching, always waiting. The silence was maddening. Every so often, she would hear his voice echo through the halls, but it was always distant, as if he wanted to remind her that he was in control. The puppy, the one thing that had kept her grounded, was now her only comfort. But even that small joy was tainted. Aleandro had insisted the dog stay with her, keeping her company, but it felt like a reminder of everything she had lost. Her life had been turned upside down in a matter of days, and now she was stuck in this gilded cage, with no clear way out. She had tried to convince herself that maybe, just maybe, if she played along, she could find a way to escape without making waves. But deep down, she knew it was a lie. She was trapped, and she hated him for it. The sound of a knock at the door brought her out of her thoughts. Her heart skipped a beat. She stood up slowly, walking toward the door, and opened it. One of Aleandro's men stood in the doorway, his face expressionless. "Aleandro wants to see you," he said. Isabella's chest tightened. She didn't have a choice. She had learned that much by now. Slowly, she nodded, stepping out of her room and following him down the familiar, grand hallways. The mansion felt more like a maze every time she walked through it. She could never quite tell where she was, but she didn't care. She just wanted to get this over with. They reached the large double doors at the end of the hall. The guard knocked once before pushing them open, and Isabella walked inside. Aleandro stood by the window, his back to her, staring out at the city skyline. He didn't turn around when she entered, but she could feel his presence, the weight of his power, pressing down on her. "I see you've made yourself comfortable," Aleandro said, his voice low and calm, but there was something underneath that made her skin crawl. Isabella didn't answer. There was nothing to say. She had stopped trying to resist him. The fight had gone out of her, leaving behind only exhaustion and frustration. "You know why you're here, don't you?" Aleandro continued, his back still to her. "I'm here because you made me come," she replied, her voice tight with defiance. Aleandro turned slowly, his eyes locking onto hers. There was no anger in his expression, just a cool, calculating gaze. "I didn't make you come. You chose this. You chose to come into my world." Isabella clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. "I didn't choose any of this. You dragged me here." He smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "You still don't understand, do you? You're not a prisoner, Isabella. You're something far more valuable, and you will learn to see that." Her heart raced as his words sank in. "Valuable?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Yes," he said, taking a step closer to her. "I've seen something in you, something I can use, and I intend to make sure you see it too." Isabella recoiled, stepping back, but she hit the back of the chair behind her. She didn't know whether to be scared or angry. He was playing a game, and she wasn't sure if she even had the pieces to play along. "You're not going anywhere, Isabella," Aleandro continued, his tone almost gentle now. "Not unless I say so. And you'll learn that resistance is futile. You're mine. And the sooner you accept that, the easier it will be for both of us." Her chest tightened, and for the first time, the weight of her situation hit her full force. She had no control over anything. He owned her life now, and no matter how much she fought it, she couldn't escape. "I won't stay here forever," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but her words were filled with a quiet determination. Aleandro's smile grew, but there was no humor in it. "You will, because you have no choice. And once you understand that, we can move forward." He stepped closer, his hand gently cupping her chin, forcing her to meet his eyes. "I'll make sure you understand what I want from you, Isabella. You'll see that we're not so different. We're both survivors. And you'll learn that life here isn't as bad as you think." Isabella didn't know what to say. She had no power in this situation. She could feel his grip tightening on her chin, and for a moment, she was afraid he might break something. But he let go, his hand retreating as quickly as it had come. He nodded to the door. "Go back to your room. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be another day." Isabella didn't speak as she turned to leave. She could feel his eyes on her the entire way out, but she didn't dare look back. She couldn't. She knew that if she did, she'd lose what little control she had left. As she stepped into her room and closed the door behind her, the weight of her situation settled over her once again. She was stuck in a world of power and control, and no matter how much she fought it, it was clear now, she would never be the same. She sank down onto the bed, her thoughts spinning. She could fight, she could resist, but deep down, she knew. She wasn't going anywhere. She was in his world now, and there was no escaping it. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The next few days felt like a blur to Isabella. Each morning, she woke up in the same large, luxurious room, the sunlight filtering through the thick curtains, casting long shadows across the plush carpet. The mansion had become her new prison, and every time she tried to imagine a way out, the walls around her seemed to grow taller, tighter. Aleandro never stopped watching her, never stopped reminding her that she belonged to him now. Isabella spent her days in silence, doing her best to avoid Aleandro and the constant eyes that followed her every move. She wasn't allowed to leave the mansion, and every time she tried to sneak out for a walk around the garden, one of the guards was there, ready to escort her back inside. She had tried to resist, tried to rebel, but it was all futile. She was trapped in this gilded cage, and the more she fought, the tighter the bars became. Her dog, still her only source of comfort, followed her everywhere she went, its innocent gaze offering the only solace in her otherwise suffocating existence. She often found herself sitting by the window, watching the world outside, longing for the freedom she once had. But the world she had known felt so distant now. It was as if that life had never truly been hers. She had crossed an invisible line, and now there was no going back. It wasn't long before Aleandro came to see her again. He was always there when she least expected it, his presence filling the room before he even said a word. Isabella had grown used to the way he moved, silent, powerful, always in control. She hated it. "You look troubled," Aleandro said one afternoon, standing in the doorway of her room. His eyes swept over her, as if he were taking inventory of every part of her. Isabella didn't look at him. She refused to acknowledge his presence. Instead, she kept her gaze fixed on the window, the dull, gray sky outside matching the weight she felt on her shoulders. "I'm fine," she muttered, her voice tight with frustration. Aleandro didn't move. "I don't think you are. You've been avoiding me," he said, his tone calm, but there was something in his eyes, something that made Isabella shiver. "You know that's not going to work, right? I gave you time to adjust, but you're not fooling anyone, least of all me." She finally turned to face him, the anger in her eyes visible. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to stay composed. Aleandro smiled, that same cold, calculating smile she had come to recognize all too well. "What do I want? I want you to understand that you belong here. You belong with me, and I will make sure you see that." Isabella's heart raced as the words hit her. She had heard them before, but now they felt like a dark promise. The air in the room grew heavy with tension, and for a moment, she thought she might suffocate from it. "I don't belong here," she whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Aleandro took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "You do now," he said softly, his voice low and steady. "Whether you accept it or not, you belong to me. And soon, you will learn that resisting me is pointless." Isabella clenched her fists at her sides, her body trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. She didn't want to believe him, but there was a small part of her that knew he was right. She had no way out. No matter how much she fought, no matter how much she wanted to escape, she was caught in his world, and there was no telling how far he would go to keep her there. "You can't control me," she said, though the words felt hollow even as she said them. Aleandro chuckled softly, the sound like ice scraping against metal. "I already have, Isabella. You just haven't realized it yet." He took another step forward, his presence overwhelming her, filling the room with a suffocating pressure. She wanted to back away, but she knew it wouldn't matter. He was always one step ahead. "Do you know why I chose you?" Aleandro asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's not just because of what you heard. It's because you're different. You have something that others don't. You're strong, and I like strength. But you also need me. You need someone who can protect you, and I'll make sure you understand that soon enough." Isabella shook her head, the words stabbing through her like daggers. "I don't need you," she said, the lie tasting bitter in her mouth. Aleandro's expression softened, but there was no warmth in it. "You will," he said. "You'll need me more than you think. And when that time comes, you'll thank me." Isabella swallowed hard, her body trembling with the weight of his words. She couldn't deny it. She was scared. Scared of him. Scared of what he could do to her. And deep down, a small part of her feared that he was right, that she would never escape his world. The door opened again, and one of Aleandro's men stepped inside. "Sir, the meeting is ready," he said, his voice respectful but distant. Aleandro gave a brief nod, his eyes never leaving Isabella's. "We'll talk later," he said, before turning to leave. Isabella stood there, frozen, as the door clicked shut behind him. The room felt colder now, emptier. She had no idea what tomorrow would bring, but she knew one thing for sure. She was stuck. And the more she tried to fight it, the more she realized that she might never get out. She turned back to the window, the rain still falling outside. Her dog, who had been lying quietly at her feet, looked up at her with gentle, trusting eyes. Isabella reached down and stroked its fur, taking comfort in the small, innocent creature that had been her only source of solace. But even that small comfort felt fleeting. As long as she was here, in this mansion, under Aleandro's control, she would never be free. And for the first time, Isabella realized that the fight wasn't just against him. It was against herself. She had to figure out how to survive in this world, even if it meant losing herself in the process. And she didn't know if she was strong enough for that. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Isabella's life had shifted once again. The days had become a blur of endless silence, punctuated only by Aleandro's occasional visits. His presence was constant, whether it was in the form of his eyes that never seemed to leave her or the soft echoes of his voice that reverberated in the halls. She was no longer just a guest in his mansion. She had become a part of it, bound by invisible chains. Every inch of the grand estate reminded her that there was no escape. The mansion had become her world now, and she hated it. She hated the way the rooms stretched on forever, filled with rich fabrics and fine art, but lacked any real warmth. She hated how, every time she walked through the halls, there was always someone watching. But most of all, she hated that Aleandro was right. She had no choice but to accept the life he had thrust upon her. One evening, as Isabella sat in her room staring out of the window, a sharp knock broke her from her thoughts. She had grown used to the interruptions, but this time, there was something different in the air. She stood up and walked slowly to the door, her heart pounding in her chest. When she opened it, the sight of Aleandro standing in the doorway caused her breath to catch. "You've been avoiding me," he said, his voice smooth but laced with something darker. Isabella didn't say anything at first. She had learned that words meant little when it came to him. There was no point in fighting it anymore. She simply nodded, stepping back to allow him to enter. He walked in without hesitation, his presence filling the room like a heavy shadow. His gaze swept over her, assessing, as though he were looking for something. "I'm not avoiding you," she said quietly, though the words sounded weaker than she intended. I need time." Aleandro gave a short laugh, the sound cold and sharp. "Time? You've had plenty of time to adjust, Isabella. You're here now. You're mine. And I expect you to start acting like it." His words were like a slap to her face. It wasn't the first time he had reminded her of her place, but every time, it stung just as much. He saw her as a possession, a piece of his world, and nothing more. "I don't belong to you," she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. She had said it before, but this time it felt different. This time, she wasn't sure if she even believed it anymore. Aleandro stepped closer to her, his presence intimidating, his gaze unwavering. He reached out, gently lifting her chin with his fingers, forcing her to meet his eyes. "You belong to me in every way that matters, Isabella. And soon, you'll understand that." She wanted to pull away, to tell him that he was wrong, but his touch held her in place, his grip like iron, though there was no anger in it. His calm was what unsettled her the most. "You can't keep me here forever," she whispered, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to stay composed. I'll find a way to leave. Aleandro's lips curved into a small, almost imperceptible smile. You don't have to leave, he said softly, almost kindly. I'm not your enemy, Isabella. But if you keep resisting me, if you keep fighting this, life will be harder than it needs to be. He paused, watching her closely. I'm offering you a life of comfort, safety, and power. All you have to do is accept it. Accept me. Her heart raced as the weight of his words sank in. He was offering her everything she had ever dreamed of, a life free of worry, a life where she didn't have to struggle to make ends meet. But it wasn't freedom. It was control. And it wasn't the kind of life she had worked for. She hadn't asked for this, hadn't asked to be a pawn in his game. I don't want your life, she said through clenched teeth. I don't want anything from you. Aleandro's expression hardened, his grip tightening ever so slightly on her chin. You'll change your mind, Isabella. You will. I'll make sure of it. Before she could respond, he dropped his hand from her face and stepped back, the space between them feeling like a chasm. He turned to leave, but then paused at the door. Tomorrow, we have a meeting, he said, his voice low. Be ready. He didn't wait for a response. The door clicked shut behind him, and she was left standing there, breathless, heart pounding. A meeting. She had no idea what he meant by that, but the thought of it filled her with dread. What more could he possibly want from her? How much further could this nightmare go? Isabella collapsed onto the bed, her hands pressed to her forehead. Every day that passed in this mansion, every interaction with Aleandro, felt like it was breaking her down a little more. She couldn't keep pretending that she was fine, that she could survive in this world without losing herself. But what choice did she have? The truth was, Aleandro was right. She didn't belong to herself anymore. She belonged to him, and that thought filled her with a kind of dread she couldn't shake. But she also knew something else. She wasn't going to give up. No matter how deep she was in his world, no matter how much power he had over her, she would find a way to escape. She had to. For now, though, she had to play along. She had to act as if she had accepted her fate, as if she had given up the fight, because she knew the more she resisted, the harder he would make it for her. So, she lay there in silence, the weight of her own thoughts pressing down on her, knowing that she was trapped in a game she didn't understand. And yet, the spark of defiance still burned inside her. She wasn't done fighting. Not yet. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The next few days passed in a blur of monotony and tension. Isabella had reluctantly learned to follow the rules, doing what she was told, trying to keep a low profile in the midst of Aleandro's ever-watchful presence. Every corner she turned, every room she entered, someone was there. The mansion was never quiet. There were always footsteps, always whispers in the hallways, always eyes following her every move. Isabella hated it. The life she had been thrown into, this gilded cage, was worse than anything she could have imagined. The luxury of the mansion was just a facade, hiding the suffocating control Aleandro had over her life. She was beginning to feel like a mere object, a prize won in some twisted game she never wanted to play. That night, she sat in her room, the only space that still felt like it belonged to her, staring out of the window. The lights of the city twinkled in the distance, but they felt so far away, like a different world entirely. She wanted to be there, to be free, but instead, she was stuck here, in this mansion, with this man who owned everything around her, her body, her time, her future. The door to her room creaked open, and she didn't have to turn around to know who it was. Aleandro. His presence filled the room like it always did, heavy and commanding. She didn't even try to hide the frustration on her face as she stood up to face him. You're late, she said, her voice sharp, trying to mask the hurt she felt. Aleandro didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped closer to her, his eyes studying her as if trying to decipher something. The room seemed to shrink with each step he took, and Isabella fought the urge to back away. She had done that enough. She had given him enough power over her life. Do you enjoy making things difficult? He finally asked, his voice low but filled with a quiet intensity. Isabella didn't answer. What was the point? Every time she tried to speak up, to stand her ground, it felt like she was being crushed under the weight of his control. I'm not here to fight with you, Isabella, Aleandro said, his tone softening. I just want you to understand something. She raised an eyebrow, trying to hide the skepticism in her gaze. Understand what? She asked, her voice quieter now. Aleandro reached out, his fingers brushing her arm in a gesture that was almost tender, but it still sent a chill down her spine. You think you can escape this, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. But you can't. You're mine now, and the sooner you accept that, the easier it will be for both of us. Isabella pulled her arm back, her eyes flashing with defiance. I'll never accept it, she said, her voice steady despite the knot forming in her stomach. Aleandro stepped back, his expression unreadable. For a moment, there was silence between them, and Isabella felt the weight of his gaze on her, like he was waiting for something. He finally spoke again, his words calm and deliberate. You're right. You won't accept it easily. But you will. Isabella took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. She wasn't sure what game he was playing, but she wasn't ready to give up yet. She couldn't let him win. She couldn't let him control her every move. I don't want your life, she said, her voice sharp with defiance. I don't want anything from you. Aleandro's lips curled into a slight smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. You'll want it, he said softly, his gaze intense. And when you do, you'll realize that I was right all along. His words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken promises. Isabella wanted to scream, to fight back, but instead, she stood there, silent. There was nothing she could say that would make him understand. Nothing she could do to break free from the world he had trapped her in. I'll give you time, Aleandro said after a pause, his voice softer now, almost gentle. But remember this, you don't get to leave. Not without me. His words were a dark promise, and Isabella felt her stomach twist. She didn't know how much longer she could endure this. How much longer she could stay trapped in this life, with him. As he turned to leave, Isabella stood frozen in place. The door clicked shut behind him, and the room seemed to close in around her. She was alone again. Alone with the fear and uncertainty that had become her constant companions. She walked to the window, staring out at the city. The lights seemed so far away, a reminder of the life she had lost, of the freedom she would never have again. But as much as she hated her situation, she couldn't let go of the hope that one day, she would find a way out. She had to. For her own sanity, for her own survival. But as the hours passed, and the mansion fell into silence once more, Isabella couldn't shake the feeling that she was running out of time. Aleandro's grip on her life was tightening, and she was beginning to wonder if there was any way to escape before it was too late. For now, all she could do was wait. But she knew deep down that waiting was the hardest part. Because the longer she stayed here, the more she began to believe that maybe, just maybe, he was right. Maybe there was no escape. Maybe she was already his, and there was nothing she could do about it. And that thought was the most terrifying of all. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The silence in the mansion was deafening. Isabella had spent the last several days in her room, not because she wanted to, but because she didn't know where else to go. She was trapped. Every time she tried to think of a way out, the walls felt like they were closing in. Aleandro had made it clear, she was his now. The heavy weight of that truth sank deeper into her every passing day. She could still hear his voice in her head, you belong to me. It had been haunting her, echoing through her thoughts like a relentless drumbeat. The more she tried to resist, the more she felt like a bird in a cage, fluttering against the bars but never able to escape. The puppy, the one thing that had kept her going, was now her only company. Every time she would sit by the window, watching the rain pour down, the small, innocent creature would curl up beside her, offering the only solace she had. But even the dog couldn't make her forget the cold, hard reality that she was living in now. Aleandro didn't visit her every day, but when he did, it was always with the same unshakable confidence, that same cold gaze that reminded her of her place in his world. The thought of him standing over her, making demands, made her feel like she was drowning. But she was beginning to realize something. The more she resisted him, the more power he had over her. The more she struggled, the more she was pulled into his world, a world where she had no say, no freedom. He controlled every aspect of her life, from the food she ate to the air she breathed. The next time Aleandro came to see her, it was not with his usual quiet intensity. There was something different about him today. He seemed more distant, almost as if he were weighing something in his mind. Isabella didn't even bother to stand when he entered. She just sat there, her eyes fixed on the floor, waiting for him to speak. "Isabella," he said, his voice soft but still carrying that undeniable authority. "We need to talk." She didn't respond immediately. What was there to say? Every conversation with him seemed to lead to the same place. He spoke, she resisted, and in the end, he always got what he wanted. "You've been quiet lately," Aleandro continued, walking toward her but not sitting down. "That's not like you." Isabella finally lifted her eyes to meet his. "Maybe I'm just tired of pretending," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Aleandro's gaze softened, but only for a moment. "You don't have to pretend with me, Isabella. I know exactly what you're going through. I've been in your shoes." That was a lie. Isabella could feel the bitterness rising in her throat. Aleandro didn't know what it was like to be trapped, to have no escape, to have your life taken from you without your consent. He had power, control. He made the rules, and the rest of them had to play by them. He was not the one who was helpless. "You don't know anything about me," she said, her voice sharper this time. "You don't know what it's like to lose everything." Aleandro didn't flinch. He stepped closer, his eyes not leaving hers. "I've lost plenty," he said quietly, "but I've never lost control." Isabella felt a pang of anger flare up inside her. "That's all you care about, isn't it? Control. You take everything from people, and you make them believe they're the ones who asked for it." Aleandro smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was a knowing, calculating smile. "I take what's mine," he said, his voice low. "And you, Isabella, are mine. You will never leave. Not unless I say so." Her chest tightened. He was right. She couldn't leave. Not until he allowed it. And even if she wanted to try, where could she go? "Why do you do this?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "Why do you keep me here?" Aleandro's eyes softened, but there was no sympathy in them. "Because I need you. I need you to understand what I can offer you. A life of security, power, everything you've ever wanted. But you have to trust me first." "Trust you?" she repeated, almost incredulously. "You want me to trust you after everything you've done? You took my life, Aleandro. You took everything from me." He stepped closer, and this time, Isabella didn't move away. She felt too defeated to run, too tired to fight. Aleandro reached out, gently cupping her chin in his hand. His touch was surprisingly tender, a stark contrast to the coldness in his eyes. "I'm offering you a life you could never have on your own," he said softly. "A life where you don't have to struggle, where you don't have to worry about anything but being by my side." Isabella felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had no idea what he was offering her, but it wasn't freedom. It wasn't life. It was control, the kind of control she could never escape from. "I don't want your life," she said, her voice barely audible. "I want my own." Aleandro sighed, letting go of her chin and taking a step back. "You will. Eventually. You'll learn to love it here. You'll learn to love me." Isabella closed her eyes, her chest tightening with a mixture of fear and anger. She had never felt more trapped, more powerless. But deep down, a small spark of defiance still flickered inside her. She wasn't going to give up. Not yet. "Tomorrow," Aleandro said, his voice returning to its usual cool tone. "We'll see how you feel tomorrow." He turned and left the room, leaving Isabella alone once again with her thoughts. She was a prisoner, but as long as she had breath in her body, she wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. She would find a way out. She had to. For now, though, all she could do was wait, and hope that somewhere, deep inside, she would find the strength to fight back. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The days felt like they were dragging on forever, and Isabella had never felt so trapped. Every part of the mansion seemed to grow more oppressive with each passing hour. The walls that had once been so beautiful now felt like they were closing in on her, suffocating her with every breath she took. She had tried everything she could think of to find a way out, subtle gestures, quiet defiance, but nothing worked. Aleandro was everywhere, watching, waiting, always in control. She spent most of her time locked in her room, her only company being her puppy, who never left her side. The small creature was her one source of comfort in a life that had turned upside down. As she sat on the bed, the puppy curled up next to her. She couldn't help but think about how she had ended up here. This wasn't the life she had imagined for herself. She had been free, working towards something, and now, she was nothing more than a captive in a world she didn't understand. Aleandro's words echoed in her mind. You will learn to love it here. She hated that phrase more than anything. How could she ever learn to love this life, this prison? He had taken everything from her, and yet, he had the nerve to tell her that she would come to appreciate it. It was a cruel joke, one that left her feeling helpless. The knock on the door broke her thoughts. She didn't need to guess who it was. Aleandro. He always came when she least expected it, when she thought she could finally gather her strength, only for him to swoop in like some dark shadow, reminding her of who was in charge. Isabella. He called softly through the door, his voice smooth and commanding. It's time. Isabella felt a wave of dread wash over her. She didn't want to face him. She didn't want to play his game anymore. But she knew she had no choice. She stood slowly, taking a deep breath before opening the door. Aleandro was standing there, just like always, his presence filling the hallway like an unspoken threat. His eyes locked onto hers as he took a step forward, the air between them charged with tension. It's time for what? She asked, trying to mask the frustration in her voice. She hated how he could control her like this, how one simple glance from him could make her feel small and powerless. We're going to have that conversation, he said with a small smile, though there was no humor in it. The one we've been avoiding. Isabella's heart pounded in her chest. She had no idea what he meant, but she knew it couldn't be good. She followed him down the hallway, past the guards who barely acknowledged her presence. The walls seemed to stretch on forever, the mansion's grandiosity only amplifying the feeling of isolation she felt. She was a guest, a prisoner, a possession, nothing more. They reached a large, dimly lit room. Aleandro opened the door and gestured for her to step inside. The moment she entered, she noticed the way the room was set up, a long, dark wooden table at the center, 2 chairs on either side. The space felt cold, impersonal. It was as if Aleandro was trying to create an atmosphere of control, to remind her that she had no say in what was happening. Sit down, Aleandro ordered, his tone leaving no room for argument. Isabella hesitated for a moment before reluctantly taking the seat across from him. She could feel the weight of his gaze as he sat down, the silence between them thick with unspoken tension. So, he began, his voice calm, but with an edge that sent a shiver down her spine. I've been patient with you, Isabella. I've given you time to adjust. But now, it's time for you to stop fighting. Isabella narrowed her eyes at him. I'm not fighting, she said quietly. I'm just trying to survive. He raised an eyebrow, his lips curling into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. You think you're surviving? He asked. You're not surviving, Isabella. You're simply existing in a world I've created for you. The words stung, but she didn't let him see how much they hurt. I don't want to live in your world, she said, her voice shaking despite her best efforts to stay calm. I want my own life. I want freedom. Aleandro leaned forward slightly, his gaze never leaving hers. You think you had freedom before? He asked, his voice low and dangerous. You were always controlled by something. Your job, your future, your debts. You've never truly been free, Isabella. Not until now. The realization hit her like a slap in the face. He was right. She had been controlled by her circumstances, her past, her need to survive. But this wasn't freedom. This was a different kind of control, one that was far more dangerous, far more suffocating. You don't get to tell me what freedom is, she said, her voice cold now. I don't care about your power or your world. I want out. Aleandro's expression softened for a moment, but there was no kindness in it. You will get out, he said, his voice quiet, almost conspiratorial. When I say you're ready. But not before. You're mine, Isabella. and you will learn to accept that. Isabella sat back in her chair, her mind racing. She couldn't let him win. She couldn't let him control her. But she also knew that fighting him would only make things worse. He had too much power, too much control. Tomorrow, he said suddenly, breaking her thoughts. We'll begin your training. Isabella blinked in confusion. Training? Yes, Aleandro said, his smile returning. Training. You need to learn your place in my world. And I'll teach you. The words hit her like a punch to the stomach. Training. She was nothing more than a tool to him, a pawn to be molded into what he wanted. I'll never be what you want, she whispered, but even she could hear the doubt in her voice. Aleandro's gaze hardened, but there was no anger in it, just a cold certainty. You will be. In time. He stood up, his movement smooth and controlled. Get some rest, he said. Tomorrow is a big day. Isabella didn't move as he walked out of the room. She was too stunned, too trapped in the gravity of his words. She was his, and she didn't know how much longer she could keep pretending she wasn't. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The days seemed to drag on endlessly for Isabella, each one blending into the next. Her life in the mansion had become a routine of sorts, a series of hollow moments that she spent walking through in a daze. Aleandro's presence loomed over her every step, always there, always watching, always reminding her of her place. She had become nothing more than a prisoner in a gilded cage. The walls of the mansion, once elegant and impressive, now felt like a constant reminder of her captivity. The more she tried to resist, the more her resolve weakened. She had fought for so long, but with each passing day, she realized just how much power Aleandro truly had. He controlled everything, her movements, her choices, even her thoughts. And yet, despite the crushing weight of his dominance, she couldn't shake the small flicker of defiance that still burned deep inside her. One evening, as she sat in her room staring out the window, she heard the familiar knock at the door. It was Aleandro again, his presence like a shadow in the doorway, waiting for her to acknowledge him. She didn't have the energy to fight anymore, so she simply nodded and allowed him to enter. His gaze swept over her, assessing, as always. You've been quiet, he remarked, his voice low and steady. Isabella didn't answer, not because she didn't have anything to say, but because she wasn't sure she could say anything that would make a difference anymore. She had grown so tired of the same conversations, the same promises. You're still resisting, he said after a moment, his voice tinged with something darker, almost disappointed. I'm not resisting, she replied softly, her eyes still focused on the view outside the window. I'm just waiting for you to stop controlling me. Aleandro didn't move, his presence still filling the room like a heavy storm cloud. You think you can escape this? You think you can fight me and win? His tone had changed, becoming colder, more calculating. I don't need to escape, Isabella said, turning to face him for the first time. I need to live. He stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. You're already living, Isabella. The life I've given you is everything you could ever want. You have safety, comfort, security. All I ask in return is your loyalty. Her chest tightened at his words, but she refused to let him see her weakness. Loyalty, she repeated, her voice filled with disbelief. You want me to be loyal to you? After everything you've done? Aleandro's expression softened, but it wasn't the softness of compassion. It was the softness of someone who had already won, someone who knew that he had broken her down to the point where there was nothing left but surrender. I don't need your trust, Isabella, he said quietly. I just need you to stop fighting me. She stared at him, the weight of his words settling over her like a blanket of cold reality. She had spent so long fighting, so long believing that somehow, someway, she would break free. But the truth was inescapable now. She had already lost. A few moments passed in silence before Aleandro spoke again, his voice calm, but unyielding. Tomorrow, we'll have another conversation. One where you'll finally understand why you belong here with me. And once you do, everything will be different. Isabella's heart raced. the small flicker of defiance inside her now struggling against the overwhelming tide of resignation that was threatening to consume her. "You can't change who I am," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You can't make me love you." Aleandro stepped closer, closing the distance between them. His fingers brushed against her cheek, a soft touch that felt almost like a caress. "I don't need you to love me, Isabella," he said, his voice soft but laden with meaning. "I just need you to accept me, to accept us." Her heart ached at his words. She didn't want to accept this life. She didn't want to belong to him, to become just another piece in his world of power and control. But deep down, she knew the truth. She was already a part of it. She had been for a long time, and no amount of resistance could change that. "I won't ever be what you want me to be," she said, her voice stronger now, though the words felt hollow. "I will never accept this life." Aleandro's gaze softened for a moment, but there was no sympathy in it, only understanding. "You will," he said quietly. "In time you will." The words hung in the air between them, and Isabella realized that no matter how much she fought, no matter how much she hated him for taking everything from her, she couldn't escape. She was trapped in his world, bound by forces beyond her control. With one final, lingering glance, Aleandro turned and left the room, leaving Isabella standing there in the silence. She knew she couldn't keep pretending she had any power in this situation. She had tried, and she had failed. But she also knew something else. No matter how deep into his world she was, she still had one thing left, her will. And as long as that was intact, she wasn't completely lost. She had to hold on to that small piece of herself, the part that still fought, still resisted. Tomorrow would be another day, and Aleandro's promises would become louder, more insistent. But Isabella was determined that no matter what, she wouldn't let him take that final piece of her soul. She wasn't sure how she would escape, or if she ever would, but she knew one thing for certain. She would never stop fighting. Step into a gripping world of intense emotions and unrelenting power in this dark romance. Follow the journey of Isabella, a woman trapped in the world of a ruthless mafia boss who has claimed her life as his own. From the moment she chases her puppy into his black SUV, Isabella is drawn into a web of power, manipulation, and seduction, with no way out. In this dark romance, Aleandro, the mafia boss, doesn't just take control of her body, he demands control of her heart. As Isabella struggles against the hold he has over her, the lines between love and obsession blur. Every attempt to resist him only tightens his grip, forcing her to confront her deepest fears and desires. Will she be able to break free from this dark romance, or will she surrender to the man who owns her in every way? This compelling story takes you deep into the heart of a dark romance, where power, passion, and pain collide. As Isabella's resistance weakens, she finds herself questioning everything she thought she knew about love, trust, and submission in this dark romance. Will she be the one to turn the tables, or will the seductive darkness of this world claim her entirely? Dive into this intense dark romance to find out.